Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I am grateful. I hope you had a great weekend. Let me start with some macro thoughts. The big worry is for a repeat of the mid-1990s, when tighter US monetary policy and a rising dollar helped trigger a worldwide financial crisis that devastated the economies of Thailand, South Korea, Russia and Brazil. And I agree with the Polish central banker chief Marek Belka, who said, "I keep my fingers crossed for the Americans to finally go ahead and hike. Eventually we'll have to swallow this frog." Home thoughts start with a short story I read on the New Yorker, which says, "We were so simpatico, we morphed into an old married couple and speeded up time." Then I went back to Pushkin. My dreams, what has become of their sweetness? What indeed has become of my youth? I've lived to bury my desires and see my dreams corrode with rust. Now all that's left are fruitless fires that burn my empty heart to dust. And again from Eugene Onegin. "And these days I've come to prefer the more steady Bordeaux. I'm no longer up to champagne from A. It's like a mistress, sparkling, flighty, vivacious, wayward, and not to be trusted. But Bordeaux is like a friend who in time of trouble and misfortune stands by us always, anywhere, ready to give us help or just share our quiet leisure. So raise your glasses to our friend Bordeaux." Salman Rushdie, "Ours is the most cryptic of centuries, its true nature a dark secret." Page 206, Imaginary Homelands. I saw this photograph of an Italian Coast Guard vessel is seen with a helicopter during the search and rescue mission underway after a boat carrying migrants capsized overnight. My conclusions are this is just awful and unbelievable. Kim Jong-Un watched the sun rise after allegedly scaling the 9,000 feet high Mount Pektu. And I'll put up a photograph. Upon arriving at the top, Kim Jong-Un greeted the Korean People's Army pilots, telling them that the alleged climb had given him mental energy more powerful than nuclear weapons. Time has Kanye West as the most influential of its 100 most influential people. Interesting essay in Counterpunch by Tariq Ali, "The New World Disorder." And I just take out a few points. "We have also seen the rise of a global empire of unprecedented power. The United States is now unchallengeable militarily, and it dominates global politics, even the politics of the countries it treats as its enemies." Before the 2003 war, Iraq, under the authoritarian dictatorship of Saddam and his predecessor, had the highest level of education in the Middle East. When you point this out, you're accused of being a Saddam apologist. But Baghdad University in the 1980s had more female professors than Princeton did in 2009. And finally, the notion that the Chinese are suddenly going to rise to power and replace the United States is baloney. It's implausible militarily, it's implausible economically and politically, ideologically. It's obvious that it's not the case. Izzat Ibrahim al-Douri reported killed. Al-Douri was the most high-profile Ba'athist official to successfully evade capture after the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and was the king of clubs and the infamous most wanted Iraqi playing cards. Al-Douri continued to lead elements of the Iraqi insurgency, such as the Ba'athist Sufi army of the men of the Naqshbandi order, against the then occupation forces, and waged an insurgency against the current regime in Baghdad. He was described as the hidden sheikh of the men of the Naqshbandi, following the execution of former President Saddam Hussein on the 30th of December 2006. Al-Douri was confirmed as the new leader of the banned Iraqi Ba'ath Party on January 2007, was reportedly killed in action along with his 9 bodyguards on 17th April 2015 in a large-scale military operation by the Shiite militias and Iraqi forces near the Al-Alas oil fields in Hemreen, east of Tikrit. Put up another photograph of him. Jumping to Yemen, apparently, not long before the founder of Saudi Arabia, King Abdulaziz ibn Saud, died in 1953, he is purported to have said, "The good or evil for us will come from Yemen." Houthis, as Saudi Arabia's goal, is the invasion of this country, its occupation, and placing this country under its feet and hegemony. And as I've said previously, I think this is a very tricky proposition for Saudi Arabia, particularly if they choose to put boots on the ground. So far, they've been trying to put other people's boots on the ground. Vladimir Putin speaks during his annual televised call-in show on April the 16th. This photograph is by Getty Images. The bubble of ideological patriotism is already quite weak. A relative calm in the Ukrainian conflict will give rise to protest sentiments in Russia, Gudkov says. During the call-in show, Putin stressed that unity was vital for Russians. If we keep the current level of consolidation in society, he told the nation, we will not be afraid of any threats. The system will be pressed into inventing a new emergency, but probably inside the country rather than outside, where it has already gone too far, says Putin's ex-advisor, Pavlovsky. He sees Russia's supposed imperialism as more of a PR bubble than a predominant ideology. It is a show themed on the Cold War. It is a soap opera with empire-related props, not an imperial project. Moving on to Iran, speaking in an address on state television, General Hossein Salami said the country will not roll out the red carpet for the enemy, believing any inspection would expose military and defense secrets. I'll put up a photograph of an Iranian military truck carrying a Bavar-373 air defense missile system past a portrait of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, during the Army Day parade in Tehran on April 18, 2015. They will not even be permitted to inspect the most normal military site in their dreams. Visiting a military base by a foreign inspector would mean the occupation of our land, because all our defense secrets are there, Salami said. Even talking about the subject means national humiliation. According to the World Bank, an estimated 50 billion instant messages were sent each day in 2014, and then at Aaron_ID tweeted, "Happy Independence Day, Syria." And there's not much happy about it. China's central bank cut its reserve ratio by 1 percentage point effective today. This RRR cut is much bigger than the market anticipated, and banks will be flooded with liquidity. It will also add fuel to the already red-hot stock market. The darkest period this year was the first quarter, and the economy will pick up in the second quarter as policy easing measures kick in and the property market recovers, he said. Li Keqiang is nervous, but he isn't panicking yet. Euro around 107.80. Dollar index 97.45 when I checked last. The yen was down around 118.60. Swissy 0.9534. The pound 149, just below 149.50. Aussie around 780.78. India rupee 62.545. South Korean won 1083.99. Rial 304.09. Egyptian pound 764.22. And the rand at 12.04. Dollar index, my target remains 110, but we are in a corrective phase at the moment. Euro dollar, my target remains 0.93, another corrective phase as well. According to an article on global research, Japanese scientists said, "We've never seen this before. White lungs found in dolphins that died near Fukushima. Interruption of blood supply leading to death of tissue. Disease has been linked to radiation exposure." On that note, I'll put up a photograph from the New Yorker of a fireman awaiting new arrivals at a decontamination center for families who are in the potential contamination zone around the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. The Bloomberg Commodities Index advanced 0.4% as China's stimulus was seen boosting demand in the world's biggest consumer of industrial metals. Lead and zinc both climbed to the highest this year on the London Metal Exchange, while copper extended gains to a 3-week high. The LME index of the 6 main base metals on the exchange slipped to a 5-year low on March the 18th on concern that slowing economic growth in China will weaken demand amid ample supplies. Gold, last time I looked, 1204.71. It's not running away from the top side to the top side, and that's giving me some relief, because I think we'll go back below 1200. Crude oil has had a tremendous rally, $58.15. That's WTI June 2015. It's very toppy here. Brent rallied 9.6% last week, biggest weekly gain in more than 5 years. The US contract registered a 5th straight weekly gain. I like this quote: "There's still a lot of optimism. Oil prices are going to bounce back, and sellers are sort of biding their time in the hopes that they don't have to face the music." Sub-Saharan Africa, my piece was called Sub-Saharan Africa Tilted to the Downside. Last week, the august institutions of the IMF, World Economic Outlook, and the World Bank, Africa's Pulse, issued high-level economic releases, which allowed us to get a feel of the terrain. The IMF's Olivier Blanchard spoke to a number of complex forces shaping the prospects around the world, and captioned the Sub-Saharan African chapter with the following headline: "Sub-Saharan Africa Resilience in the Face of Headwinds." The IMF confirmed SSA GDP growth at 5% in 2014, down from 5.2% in 2013, but forecast that GDP expansion would sink to 4.5% in 2015. Oil exporters in the region will be severely affected, with growth in 2015 marked down by almost 2.5 points. They concluded by saying this outlook for the region is subject to significant downside risks. The World Bank forecast that SSA GDP in 2015 would only clock 4%, that is a full 0.5%, below the IMF's forecast. The World Bank further pointed out that the 2015 forecast is below the 4.4% average annual growth rate of the past 2 decades, well below Africa's peak growth rates of 6.4%, which were achieved in the 2002-2008 period. The World Bank concluded with risks to the economic outlook are tilted to the downside. Just digest the fact that the World Bank is predicting Sub-Saharan Africa is set to grow a full 10% below its 20-year average. Beneath the surface of this prediction, we know that the big primary commodity exporters, Nigeria and Angola, oil, Zambia, copper and others, have taken big punches in their solar plexus. The still primary commodity producer nature of Sub-Saharan Africa is explained by the fact that the World Bank is predicting that 36 African countries, which are expected to see terms of trade deterioration, are home to 80% of the population and 70% of the economic activity in the region. In anticipation of possible surges in the volatility of exchange rates and capital flows, countries should also carefully monitor their financial sectors, and those planning Eurobond issues may need to prepare contingency plans. That's going back to the IMF. African currencies, from the Angolan kwanza to the Nigerian naira, has to be devalued, and this is the first thing I would do as President Buhari. I would go large on the naira devaluation and allow the markets then to find the equilibrium price. Through the kwacha, even the shilling does not look so Teflon now and is at 3-year lows. What is very clear is that we previously were concerned that we could not eat GDP, and now we do not have as much GDP to eat as we did in the very recent past. There is a theory that bold reforms are undertaken in adversity. I'm not so sure. I worry that it becomes more of a bun fight, not less. In several oil-importing countries such as Côte d'Ivoire, Kenya and Senegal, growth is expected to remain strong. Here in Kenya, security challenges are beginning to tilt this positive slant lower, and we never saw a full and proper transmission of the lower oil price structure into the domestic economy. The shot in the arm that I expected was diluted big time. The African tide is rising a lot more slowly in 2015, and some seriously visionary and ahead of the curve leadership is required, or as Billy Ocean once sang, when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Who the tough are, still an open question. On that note, I'll put up a tweet pic I took when I was in Maputo, and it was an Africa Rising conference, and I wrote Africa Rising, but no longer in the rising tide floats all boats' way. It was in 2012 and 2013. Bloomberg is leading with Mugabe's biggest threat to 35-year rule lies in his own party. Ruling ZANU-PF is effectively breaking apart because of a power struggle between factions of the party, with one backing Mugabe, including politicians who played no role in the liberation struggle that led to independence from the UK in 1980. 5 people familiar with the situation said. The split deepened when Vice President Joyce Mujuru was ousted at a December Congress. Her followers planned to try and compete in by-elections in June and may take part in the 2018 general and presidential elections, 3 of the people said, asking not to be identified because public announcements haven't been made. Of course, we know Zimbabwe holds the world's biggest platinum and chrome deposits after South Africa. The economy has halved in size since 2000, and clearly it's going to be a tricky situation. Citigroup sees window for African borrowers before rate rise. Sub-Saharan Africa sold a record $9.2 billion of Eurobonds last year, up from $6.7 billion in 2013, as issuers including Ivory Coast and Kenya tapped the market before funding conditions worsened in the second half as crude oil prices plunged, weighing on economies such as Nigeria and Ghana. The market's incredible for African issuers. Nicholas Samara, Citigroup's Vice President for Debt Capital Markets in Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa, said by phone. Can't get any better. Many policymakers are looking to issue in the capital markets before the landscape changes. Moving to Africa, the head of the AU team overseeing the poll, Olusegun Obasanjo, said turnout stood between 30 and 35%, so very low. Very good video program on Al Jazeera's South Sudan Country of Dreams. This is a fault lines documentary. Burundi police clash with opposition protesters. The international crisis group said on Friday, calling the elections decisive, warning in a new report that tension is rising and prospects for free and fair polls are slimmer by the day. And I take you back to Ouagadougou and what happened there. Al-Contact tweeted, despite heavy police deployment, Burundi opposition able to protect political leaders from being arrested with popular support. South Africa all shares up 9.48% year to date, has had a very, very strong start to the year. South African xenophobic attacks, shops looted, violence on streets of Johannesburg as foreigners are forced to hide in police stations. I'll put up a photograph that's gone wild across social media of a Mozambican man lying in the street after he was reportedly stabbed by a mob in Alexandra Township, Johannesburg. It really is an appalling stain on South Africa, and if they think they have a leadership position, this is where they're losing it. Nedbank Group annual report showed it made 357 million rand in headline earnings from its rest of Africa division, but when you compare that to Barclays African Standard Bank, they generate much more. Dollar rand around the 1204 level, Egyptian pound 764.22. Egyptian stock market, which was up about 15% at some point during the year, is now down 0.98%. Nigerian all share is at November 2014 highs. It's up 3.59% so far this year. Ghana Stock Exchange also on the mend, up 0.52% in 2015. Lagarde says of Ghana's IMF program, it clearly will have a catalytic effect. When a country has signed a program, it generally always triggers on the part of other bilateral institutions, of other bilateral lenders, financing that sometimes has been frozen or locked. Deutsche Bank put out an interesting report on Kenya. External deficit is mostly financed by short-term inflows. The country is vulnerable to changes in the global economic environment, experiencing solid growth, 6% in 2014, 7% forecast in 2015, driven particularly by manufacturing and construction, but also by consumer services, banking and telecommunications, and agriculture. Infrastructure bottlenecks, poor business environment prevent Kenya from reaching its growth potential. Current account deficit remains structurally high, 7% of GDP likely in 2015, on the back of low-value exports, mostly tea and horticulture, each with a 20% share, and strong imports of both capital and consumer goods. Drop in oil prices is beneficial given that oil accounts for over 20% of imports. External debt remains below 30% of GDP. Shilling is undergoing moderate depreciation. Inflation has started to ease, helped by cheaper oil. And this is something that struck me. The hotel and restaurant sector has shrunk 30% since 2012. Kenya shilling 93.4083 3-year lows. Nairobi all share plus 6.32% year to date. Bounced 0.95% Friday. And it really is a story of big cap outperformance. NSE 20 is negative for the year, minus 0.376%, and is at a December 30, 2014 low. If you care to check any listed share, there is a link at the bottom of Rich Wrap-Ups. And Kwale Miner Base Resources is banking on a 2.4 billion shilling VAT refund to pay its loan, by the government. I wish you a tremendous week. I'll go back to Pushkin, if I may. My dreams, what has become of their sweetness? What indeed has become of my youth? That's something to ponder.